All right, we're going to try this again. I did try earlier to put out one of these podcasts, but a little bit of the household stuff came up with some dogs barking. I am Chris Hinkle. I am your blunt force conservative. I am a husband, a father, and new grandfather. I am also a retired FBI supervisory special agent. And today we're going to talk about the Constitution. Now, you may ask, why would somebody like me be somebody you might want to listen to about the Constitution? Well, as some of my opponents on the debate stage have found out, that someone that's passionate about the Constitution has studied it and has had some experience actually putting it into action. In other words, as a federal agent enforcing the Constitution, I have a pretty deep well of knowledge, skills, and experience on the topic. I've talked to a number of current law school students, and I was surprised to find there's not a ton of teaching on the Constitution in law school. It's just a small portion, which is unusual because it is the foundation for every law that we have in the United States, federal, state, and local. Everything must pass constitutional muster. And something that a lot of our elected representatives don't take to heart is that all local, state, and federal representatives swear an oath to protect and defend the U.S. Constitution. States don't have their candidates swear in to their state constitution. They may do that secondary, but primarily they're sworn in to the U.S. Constitution. The other thing that I found is kind of unusual, or at least it was disturbing, are the number of elected representatives. When I query them on the Constitution, they have difficulty articulating what our rights are, even though that's the number one priority of what they're charged to do. As we mentioned, it's literally the one thing that they swear an oath to protect and defend. That's our liberties, as articulated in the Constitution. I also find it a bit disturbing with a number of the college and high school students that are unfamiliar with what the constraints of the Constitution actually are. They are a restriction on government. They're a list of things that the government cannot do. It's not a list of things that the government can do. Now, it does break into, Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, into the three branches of government and what the responsibilities of each of those branches are. And each of those branches have unique responsibilities. Some of them have responsibilities that aren't afforded to the other two branches. And we could talk about that another day. But today I wanted to cover the First Amendment. I've been asked a number of times to just kind of talk the way I talk. I want to keep this very plain spoken. I could go into specific detail about the history of things, citing, Supreme Court rulings, challenges by different branches of government, things like that. But what I really want to help you out with is being able to civilly and cogently confront your elected representatives on what they are not, or should be doing in support of their responsibilities under the Constitution. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the First Amendment, and we're going to keep it very basic, very layman, something that when you're challenged, even by a college professor or someone that considers himself a constitutional attorney, or a media person, as I interacted with not long ago, that tried to remind me that even though he's in media right now, that he previously was a constitutional lawyer, and he was tongue in cheek complimenting me kind of sarcastically. Well, law enforcement officers always seem to be the most knowledgeable on constitutional rights. And I said, hey, man, thank you for actually recognizing that. Um, I think anybody can take the time to learn about the Constitution. I encourage you to read the Constitution. It's not a long document. And I also encourage you to read the Federalist Papers, which gives you the background of what some of our founding fathers were debating as they drafted these important amendments. So let's start off with the First Amendment. And what we're going to do now, and I don't have a producer today, so I'm having to do all of my work here, is I'm going to share a screen here. And what we have on the screen right now are the words of the First Amendment. It's Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, comma, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, semicolon, that's important, or abridging the freedom of speech, comma, or of the press, semicolon again, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. Now, let's start off with that first one, the respecting an establishment of religion. We've got some organizations out there, the Freedom of from Religion Foundation, that seems to lay their foundation on some statements that were made by Thomas Jefferson, I think around 1802. I don't want to get too much in the weeds, where he was talking about this wall between church and state. And if anybody that, even with a very limited amount of knowledge on the topic, if you read up on that, you can see that Thomas Jefferson was talking about how we're going to keep the government from forcing citizens into a state-sponsored religion. That doesn't mean that the federal government can't come out and, in the protection of faith and liberties, speak out in support of certain faiths. I mean, we have the 10 Commandments in most of our courthouses. I know here in Mississippi we do. And when they talk about freedom from religion, it's really kind of a way to obfuscate what their true nature is, which is they're trying to get all foundations of religion, all mentions of religion out of politics. And in our founding fathers, the majority of them, even the ones that weren't just devout Christians, spoke out in support of the Bible and how it influenced our constitutional republic. So when they talk about respecting the establishment of religion, they're talking about keeping the government from forcing you into a particular religion. When we were under King George, there was the Church of England, and you were mandated to be it was the official church of the government, was the Church of England. It also talked about prohibiting keeping the government from prohibiting you from exercising your religion. Now, it doesn't mean that your religion gets to take precedence over the Constitution. So you can't come in here with something that's antithetical to what our constitutional values are, like Sharia law. Sharia law is incompatible with our laws, with our Constitution, with our founding, and it should not be practiced here in the United States. You want to practice it in private, that's fine, but it can't be a portion of our government. You want to talk about actually forcing someone into a particular religion, that's what that's all about. And our Constitution protects against that. Now, I'm going to keep this podcast a little short here. I just want to cover a couple of things for about 15, 20 minutes or so. The next is abridging the freedom of speech. And you can see there's a comma, or of the press. So on the speech topic, you'll see some people incorrectly often say, well, the business can't tell me I can't say this, or the platform can't tell me I can't do this, say this online. That's a violation of our my First Amendment right to free speech. Actually, it's not. The Constitution prohibits government from taking actions to infringe upon your liberties. You can still suffer the consequences of exercising your free speech in the marketplace. Now, there are some marketplaces that have to adhere to the Constitution. For example, the American for Disabilities Act, that mandates that all, not some, all businesses that are out there have to adhere to that. That's not an infringement on the Constitution. That's something we have articulated our will and intent through our elected representatives, that here's some additional protections that we want to add, and everybody has to adhere to those. Now, the government can't pick and choose which entities can and cannot adhere to the ADA. There's another limitation on government and limitations on business, and that's if the business becomes an agent of the government. So what comes to mind is when the Biden administration and the Department of Justice and FBI were sending agents and attorneys out to meet with Facebook, and they were trying to coerce, encourage, stress that there was certain misinformation out there that Facebook had to take down. Now, when you're doing something at the direction of the government, you become an agent of the government. When you become an agent of the government, then you are susceptible to the laws that restrict the government. For example, 18 USC 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. You can't go out as the government and force, through intimidation or through action, a business to go out and engage in activity that you're restricted from doing. Because if you're doing that, they're acting as an agent of the government, and they could be susceptible to violating those laws. So another thing that people often bring up, especially when I get into these debates about our rights being absolute, and I believe that our rights are absolute, I've not lost a debate on that, is an example they give is yelling fire in a crowded theater. So, can you yell fire in a crowded theater? Yes, you can. It is not a violation of law to yell fire in a crowded theater. It's not a violation of law anywhere in the United States. If there is a danger, there is a fire in a crowded theater, by all means, you should be letting people know that there's a danger and there's a fire in a crowded theater. Now, if you're doing that with nefarious intent, with evil intent, you could be violating the law by inciting a riot, a panic, or something like that, putting people in danger if there's not a fire in a crowded theater. That's similar, and we'll talk about it another day, to your Second Amendment rights when you're using a weapon. So a firearm by itself is a tool. It is incapable, without the actions of an actor, a person, of engaging, of participating in any criminal activity. So I'm a firm believer that our rights with firearms are absolute. And we can talk about the reasoning behind that in another podcast, where we talk about why citizens should be afforded the opportunity to have every type of weapon in their arsenal that the government can't. We'll talk about that another day. So when we're talking about freedom of speech, a lot of that had to do with your ability to go out and openly criticize the government. So that can be done through the press. That can be done through what we're going to talk about here in a moment, which is the right of people to peaceably assemble. And I can give you some examples of how government has infringed on that here in the last 5 years. So when we're talking about the press, they have a right to go out and report without government intrusion, without government prohibition of anything positive or negative dealing with the government. Now, does the press have unlimited access? Do they have more access to things than the citizens? Too often we see some of these, I don't know, media influencers, newscasters that talk about their sources within the government and getting information. But here's something that not a lot of people recognize. The press has no more rights than the average citizen does. If by some reason the average citizen is prohibited from doing something or saying something, the press can't use that freedom of the press to get an exemption if they use that for nefarious means or to violate a legitimate restriction. I'll give you an example of a legitimate restriction. So when I was in the Air Force, I was an Air Force Office of Special Investigations agent. We had one of the aircraft down at Keesler when it was flying around. I think it was one of the Hurricane Hunters. Somebody had shot at the plane. There were bullet holes in the plane. So we went out to investigate the damage to the plane. And as we're walking out onto the runway, and those of you that have been in the military know that there's a red line that's painted there. You can't cross that red line. There are signs that say deadly force is authorized for crossing that red line. That red line is there for national security, to protect the aircraft, to protect the assets, to protect the people. and you have to adhere to that red line. Even as a federal agent, I wasn't allowed to cross that red line unless I had authorization to do so, whether it be through an investigation or not. But the press, just like a citizen, can't just walk across it. So there can be some restrictions to access, but the press has no more access than citizens do. When they set up the barriers, there's no free press zone, but not for citizens. And I think it was a couple of years ago, we had something about free speech zones. Those are unconstitutional. We cover that another day. But the press often acts like their rights are much stronger or paramount to a citizen's rights. And often our elected representatives play along with that. For example, during the COVID overreach by the government, and it was COVID overreach, our governor here in Mississippi was holding conferences, press conferences, to talk about things, about measures during this COVID overreach, these government actions. And I made a call up to say, hey, I've got a couple of questions. Can I come down there and just sit in the crowd and ask some questions? Well, no, we're only opening that up to press. Well, why can't a citizen ask their representative? And that's going to be a portion of this First Amendment that some people overlook about why that's a problem for me. So I wasn't allowed to ask those questions. They told me I had to work through an intermediary, which is contact the press, and hopefully those would get asked. They did tell me, a staffer told me they would forward the question, and if the governor felt like it needed to be answered, he might give me a call or work through them. No, you have a right to talk to your elected representatives at any level. Now, there are certain restrictions based on time, national security protection. You can't just walk up on the president of the United States and ask questions, but you should have the ability to ask something of your elected representatives, regardless of what office they're in. Now, I told you I was going to talk about some restrictions here where they violated the Constitution of the state of Mississippi, and that's the right of people to peaceably assemble. People are allowed to get together with the same views and opinions or differing and talk and discuss things. The government can't come in and say, you're not allowed to get together in a public place. There is no emergency exception to the Constitution. But here in Mississippi, they tried to enforce something like that because our governor, Tate Reeves, and I like the guy. I've talked to him a number of times. We have share some similar interests. Our kids played soccer together. Talking with I've talked with him a number of times out in public. But this was an overreach when he shut down the parks during COVID, that he didn't want students getting out there and hanging out in the parks. That's a problem for me. The other thing that he did that was an infringement on the Constitution was he determined where you could engage in commerce and how. He shut down the small businesses here, would not let them operate. And he said, if you're going to go to the big box stores like Walmart or Lowe's or Home Depot, that you had to adhere to certain criteria that he set forth under the direction of his state health officer, Thomas Dobbs. That all was a violation of the Constitution. He put these out through executive orders. They weren't codified in law. And executive orders are administrative procedures of the executive branch on how they're going to administer an already existing law or already existing mandate from the legislature, which is our closest representative. So I just called up the local law enforcement, the sheriff, the police, and I said, if I go to Walmart and I choose not to wear a mask and I choose to go hang out at the public park, what are you going to do about it? You know what they said? It's an executive order. We don't enforce executive orders. We only enforce ordinances and laws. So absolutely nothing happened. The last is to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Now, I was really surprised when I started asking this question, tell me what your First Amendment rights are. And I would ask this of elected officials, of National Merit Scholars. I've even asked attorneys, tell me all of your First Amendment rights. And the majority of them, not just some, but the majority of them were incapable of telling you all of the rights. They could come up with the establishment of religion, the freedom of speech and freedom of the press. They might get assembly, but almost none of them got to petition the government for redress of grievances. That means it's your right to civilly and cogently confront your elected representative and ask them questions. It doesn't restrict you. In other words, if it doesn't say it in the Constitution, it doesn't exist. So it doesn't restrict you to say you can only do it if you pay money and go to this donor event, or if you buy a ticket to go to an event, or if it's at a predetermined government event. No, it means you can, if you bump into your representative at church, at the ball fields, at the grocery store, go up and engage them in conversation. Now be civil about it. If they're having a family time with their kid at the ballpark or something, and it's clear that, and they're just like, hey, can we talk a little later or something? They should be open to talking to you. But you should be able to go up and ask them questions. Hey, can I ask you a couple questions? That's kind of where I got my reputation here in Mississippi, and why a number of people ended up approaching me about running for office, was the fact that I just had casual conversations with my representatives, not intimidated by them. I don't know, maybe it was all bottled up because I retired from the FBI in 2019, almost 6.5 years ago. And, for the longest time, the Hatch Act applied to me, which, you kind of stayed away like it was toxic from politics or even discussion of politics. We still had politics inside, the squad bays and stuff, but it wasn't like you see out here on the street. And we definitely weren't out there practicing, posting all of our political posts. And if you did, you got in trouble for it. There's a number of FBI agents that lost their positions or were encouraged to retire pretty quick because they got pretty vocal out there on social media while employed as an FBI agent and while they were under the coverage of the Hatch Act. So, yes, you should be able to talk to your elected representative. If you can't, if they refuse to talk to you, tell everybody. If they're hateful and mean, tell everybody. If they refuse to talk to you, tell everybody. If they talk to you and you disagree, tell everybody. If they talk to you and you both agree, tell everybody. You should be able to have that open conversation. If not, point it out. Let people know about it. That's what I do. I'll ask the question. If they don't talk to me, I'll take note of every time I've called their office, who I talked to, date and time, and I'll keep a track record of that. And if they don't want to participate in this First Amendment, then I'll point that out as well. So anyway, this is our first podcast on this. I just wanted to cover some things on the First Amendment. So one of the things that you can do when you go out there to demonstrate that you've done your study and done your homework is just ask people, hey, rattle off your protections under the First Amendment. Give them something easy. And then, based on how they answer, engage them in conversation about it. Get them to explain how they interpret it. Most of the schools don't really teach civics anymore. I'm hoping that's going to make a return. It definitely benefited me in the 1970s in Miss Nichols' class at Tuscaloosa Junior High School. It helped shape what I am today. It helped me get onto the path to eventually becoming an FBI agent. It's just very beneficial to have a good understanding of the Constitution. Now, some of the things we're going to talk about in the future, of course, we're going to talk about the Second Amendment. We'll talk about your Fifth Amendment rights. We'll talk about Miranda versus Ohio. We'll talk about Terry searches. I think it's Terry versus Ohio as well. But we will talk about all of those and give you some basic layman's understanding of it, of how you can explain it. I've just found that when you can have that layman's, in casual conversation, if you can just talk, things tend to work out so much better. I don't yell, I don't scream, I just have a conversation. And if somebody doesn't want to have a conversation with me, they want to yell and scream at me, I just stand back and let them yell and scream. Because as my grandfather used to say, when two people are yelling and screaming at each other and one of them's an idiot, the people around that can't understand what either of them are saying don't know who the idiot is. So why don't you just step back and remove all doubt? Let that other person act irresponsibly. Well, thanks again for tuning in to this Blunt Force Conservative short podcast. I think we did 20, 25 minutes. I've got a lot of things on the agenda. We are helping take care of the new granddaughter here. It's been amazing. And I look forward to spending more time with you. I'm going to try to do more of these. I'd love to get in the habit of doing these daily. I also am looking into doing some quick hits about commenting on the topics of the day and putting that out there. If you've got any questions about the Constitution, again, I am not a professor. I'm not an attorney. I'm just someone that has some knowledge, skills, and experience in enforcing the Constitution, having been the civil rights program person here in the state of Mississippi. And we were pretty dadgum successful. The guys on my squad did some amazing things with some cases, some very historical cases that we'll talk about another day. But thanks for listening in. I hope that that you picked up on something here or there. If you've got any questions, don't hesitate to DM me on X or leave a comment on YouTube. We are live streaming on X and YouTube. If you're over on YouTube, even if you're not on YouTube, please go over there and hit the like button. Just give us a little thumbs up and subscribe. It helps us out here. We're trying to get something going and building here. We just got started with this, and I look forward to spending more time with you. Thanks again for taking the time to tune in.